Vlog 1, Chapter 1. The Great Ice Age shaped the geological history and contributed to the origins of the continent's human history. A land bridge connected Eurasia and North America. Nomadic Asian hunters crossed the Bering Strait, which later disappeared due to water levels rising because of glaciers melting. The earliest civilizations in the Americas were the Aztecs and Incas. They developed after hunter-gatherers because of the stable crop of corn. This helped raise their population. There were indirect discoveries of America by North seafarers. They developed temporary settlements, but they were soon abandoned. Christopher Columbus arrived in the Bahamas in 1492. What follows Columbus is diseases like smallpox, yellow fever, and malaria. This wipes out 90% of Native Americans. If diseases weren't enough, later came Spanish conquistadors. They came and killed or enslaved the natives, taking their gold and silver. When missionaries tried to convert the natives to Christianity, Pope's rebellion occurred. The natives killed many priests and destroyed every Catholic church in the province. The Spanish occupied some of North America, but much of Mexico and South America between 1492 and 1745. Chapter 2. In 1600, most of North America remained mostly unexplored and unclaimed by Europeans. Three European powers created three outposts: the Spanish in Santa Fe in 1610, the French at Quebec in 1608, and the English at Jamestown in 1607. 1500s England sprawled with Spain and Ireland, so didn't see much colonization for 2 years after peace with Spain. A joint stock company received charter from James I. It was a promise of gold and a desire to find a passage to the Americas, to the West Indies. Jamestown was a nightmare in the beginning. Many died from diseases, malnutrition, and starvation. They mainly focused on trying to get gold and did not focus on hunting for food or planting crops. The leader, John Smith, of Jamestown, saved the colony from failing. The relations between the whites and the natives of Virginia was shaky at best. There was times of peace and times of war. The most significant war was the First Anglo-Powhatan War. And then afterwards there was 8 years of peace when Pocahontas married John Rolfe. Then the Second Anglo-Powhatan War started in 1641, or 44. It was an effort to get rid of the Virginians, however it failed just like the first. The tobacco industry saved Jamestown. It put the colony on firm economic foundation. In Maryland, they also relied on tobacco. However, in the West Indies, they had sugarcane. In the West Indies, they used African slaves, whereas Virginia and Maryland relied on indentured servants for working. Tobacco was the poor man's crop. It was easy to plant and easy to take care of, whereas sugarcane was the rich man's crop, harder to take care of and harder to plant. Later, Maryland would switch from indentured servants to Indian slaves. Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia all were devoted to exporting commercial agricultural products. All had some religious toleration, and were all expansionary. Chapter 3. The separatists fled Holland from the royal wrath. They then later fled Holland because they did not want their kids Dutchified. So after negotiating with the Virginia Company, they sailed on the Mayflower and found Plymouth. The separatist pilgrims were dedicated extremists, but there were some non-separatist Puritans who wanted to reform the Church of England from within. But they later fled to Massachusetts, fearing for their faith. They set up the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The religious leader had enormous influence in this colony. Roger Williams was banished from this colony and set up a settlement in Rhode Island. He was banished for speaking his mind about religion, and the Puritan leaders didn't like that. Rhode Island had great religious tolerance. The middle colonies had much in common, for it had much fertile land, and there was very ethnically mixed. Chapter 4. 17th century Europeans and Africans adopted to the New World, and natives adopted to these new people as well. But the colonies were very dependent on the Atlantic economy. Tobacco economy was very important and required more labor. Indentured servants was the answer. Very abundant in England, and it was cheaper than slaves. However, the indentured servitude failed due to problems between the servants and the master. Thus, they transferred over to slaves. Native-born African slaves contributed to a distinctive culture as well as helped heavily build the country with labor. Clean water and cool temperatures stopped the spread of killer microbes, and population started to rise. For a married woman could have up to much as 8 children. New Englanders had tightly knit society which consisted of small villages and farms. Then the Salem witch trials occurred, which was a crazy hysteria of people accusing each other of witches, and it got 19 people hung. Chapter 5. The 13 colonies had a distinctive social, economic, and political structure. Colonial America was a melting pot. Population was basically English in stock and language, but had many foreign groups entwined with it. These ethnic groups included Africans, Germans, Irish, Dutch, French, Highlanders, and Swedes. Colonial society consisted of equality and opportunity, and there was no nobility or underclass to threaten the society. The most honored profession during this time was the Christianity ministry. Agriculture was the leading industry and involved 90% of people. Taverns had bowling alleys, pool tables, bar, and gambling, as well as gossip and information. The Great Awakening started in the 1730s by Jonathan Edwards. American colonists made contributions to politics. 8 of the colonies had royal governors appointed by the king, 3 were under their own governors, and 2 had their own governors under self-governing charters. Colonial life, food was plentiful. The North had winter sports. The South had card playing and horse racing for pastimes. Chapter 6. France in the 1500s was convulsed by foreign war and domestic strife. This included clashes between Roman Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. However, a new era dawned when the Edict of Nantes granted limited toleration to French Protestants in 1598. And a lot of the reason why French was late to establish colonies in America was because of all this religious turmoil. In 1608, the French established Quebec. Samuel de Champlain, soldier and explorer, leadership skills gave him the nickname Father of New France. The beaver pelt was very valuable and used to make hats. French fur trappers ranged all over North America, and this helped span out the French territory. King William's War, spanning from 1689 to 1697, and Queen Anne's War from 1702 to 1713, it was mostly between the British colonists and the French fur trappers. Both sides had Indian allies, but neither's army came to aid them, because neither considered America worth the commitment. The peace treaty in 1713. British won limited trading rights in the Spanish America, and from France they got Arcadia. France and Spain were badly beaten by the British. British colonists increased their confidence in military strength, and they gained military experience, and they gained self-esteem. This helped lead to colonists rebelling against Britain, demanding the rights of Englishmen. Barriers of disunity melted when the different colonies discovered that they spoke a similar language and shared common ideas. Chapter 7. At first, Americans only wanted the rights of Englishmen, and they wanted to stay connected with Britain, but there was a huge difference in which each country's political principles were. British believed in mercantilism. Mercantilism wealth is power, and country's economic wealth could be measured with the amount of gold or silver in its treasury. America resented this system, for they believed that their welfare was being sacrificed for British commercial interests. After the 7 Years' War, British had a huge debt, so Britain imposed taxes on the colonies. They imposed the stamp tax, which was later repealed after so much uproar. Then the Boston Tea Party occurred in 1773. Parliament responded to this with the Intolerable Acts. This brewed a revolution, including the Quartering Acts and the Quebec Act. In 1775, the British were attacked by Americans while on their way to seize colonial gunpowder. The British had a war on its hands. The British forces were composed of the British, Hussein's Loyalist Indians, and African Americans. On the American side, it was the Americans and later the French. Chapter 8. In 1775, America drafted new appeals to the king. They anticipated rebuff, though, so the delegates adopted measures to create an army and navy. In 1776, Thomas Paine published Common Sense, one of the most influential pamphlets ever created. It called for independence and creation of a new political society, a republic, where power came from the people. The War of Independence was a war from within. You had the Patriots versus the Loyalists, which the Patriots were the Whigs and the Loyalists were the Tories, and only about 60% of the American people were Loyalists. The Loyalists were mildly persecuted by the Declaration of Independence. They were mostly imprisoned. In 1779, Spain and Holland fought against the British. The darkest period of the war was in 1780 to 1781. But after Yorktown, the British were weary of the war. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. America was the only one to gain from this war.